The world of the darknet beckons with its mystery and scares with its shadows. For some it is a space of complete freedom, for others it is a dark maze filled with terrifying secrets. Daniel, a 26-year-old software developer, has always been skeptical of stories about the darknet. Another fiction for clicks, he thought, reading another post about dark markets or live broadcasts. But one day, out of curiosity and a desire to prove that it was all a myth, he decided to immerse himself in this world personally. Daniel had been preparing for his experiment for a long time. I downloaded a secure browser, set up a VPN, and checked the computer's security. At first, everything seemed simple: old forums with outdated information, links to closed stores, pages requiring access codes. But soon he came across a site that was different from the others. The True Stories of the Darknet, read the inscription on a dark background. The background of the page pulsed with neon hues, creating a feeling of anxious anticipation. Access to the site was paid, but the subscription cost was insignificant, only a couple of dollars in cryptocurrency. Curiosity outweighed caution, and he signed up. As soon as he entered, his eyes widened. The site offered a wide selection of recordings, text stories, videos, audio files. All the materials were allegedly real evidence of events that took place on the darknet. Some of the stories were outright fake, but some were thought-provoking. He was particularly attracted to the live broadcasts section. At first it looked harmless: closed rooms where people talked, joked, and sometimes conducted strange experiments. But one day he accidentally clicked on a link that was not signed. The screen was filled with an image from the surveillance camera. The room is empty except for a table and a chair. He wanted to close the window, but changed his mind when a man in a black mask entered the room. The man pulled out a bag from behind his back and put it on the table. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. The mask slowly cut open the bag with a knife, and a trembling hand crawled out. Daniel closed the broadcast, but later his curiosity overcame his fear. He returned to the site again to see what happened next. This time, the link was already inactive, but in the comments, users discussed what had happened. Some called it a staging, others claimed that it was a real crime. Daniel did not notice how he spent the whole night on the site, looking through the materials. He was particularly interested in the recordings with an unusually long title: Sleeping Patient, Observation Number 47. The description referred to a man who claimed to have been the victim of experiments by an unknown organization. The video began with a surveillance camera recording. A man in hospital pajamas was sitting in a windowless room. A voiceover demanded an answer from him: "What's your name? What do you remember?" The patient was shaking his head, muttering something incoherent. At first it looked like a staging, but then the patient abruptly raised his head, as if he had heard something that the camera had not recorded. His eyes darted around the room, and then he began to scratch something on the wall with his nails. Daniel paused the video and zoomed in on the image. The letters were clumsy, but quite legible: "They are watching." Daniel felt uneasy, but he couldn't stop. He continued to search for records related to this patient. He soon discovered that each of them was getting weirder. The last recording was short. The camera captured an empty room where one word was written on the wall: salvation. Daniel immersed himself in studying the comments. People claimed that the patient had disappeared, and the observers who posted the video seemed to have disappeared too. However, some claimed that it was a carefully planned viral project designed to scare and attract attention. But the real strangeness began a few days later. Daniel began to notice that some files on his computer had disappeared. Programs that he had never installed started running on their own. And one morning he found a file on his desktop with the title, "They are already nearby." Inside was the text: "Do you think this is a game? Are you sure you want to know the truth?" At first he thought it was a virus. He erased the file, disconnected the computer from the network, but the text appeared over and over again. A few days later, Daniel received a strange email on his email. The sender was anonymous, and the text was as follows. "Daniel, you think you're looking at them, but now they're looking at you." The attached image showed a photo of his house taken from the window of a nearby building. Daniel felt his heart tighten in his chest. He slowly looked around the room, feeling as if someone was watching him. Some inner voice kept saying that this was all a bad joke, someone's evil prank, but intuition said the opposite. He got up from the table and went to the window. His apartment on the second floor always seemed safe to him. But now, even the thick curtains did not save from the feeling that someone was watching. Daniel carefully pulled back a corner of the cloth and peered into the street. No one. The empty road was illuminated by dim lanterns, and the windows of the house next door were dark. He took a step back, trying to stop shaking. However, as soon as he turned away, a strange sound came from the next room, quiet but distinct. It was a kind of metallic squeak. Daniel froze. His brain was running through the options in a panic. Maybe a draft? Or a mouse, he thought, although his mind understood that this was self-deception. Gathering his courage, he grabbed a kitchen knife from the table and moved towards the sound. On the threshold of the bedroom, he stopped, peering into the dimness of the room. Inside, everything was as he had left it. The bed was made, a jacket was hanging on a chair, and the laptop was closed on the bedside table. But then he noticed a strange thing. The closet door, which he was definitely closing, was ajar. "Damn," he whispered, feeling sweat trickle down his back. Gathering his strength, Daniel stepped forward and yanked open the door. Empty. No signs of forced entry, no foreign objects. Just clothes and boxes. He breathed out a sigh of relief, but then a note neatly taped to the inside of the door caught his attention. It was written on it in a flourish, "You can't hide." Daniel's legs gave out. His hand with the knife was shaking, and the air in the room seemed to have become thicker. The note couldn't have appeared on its own. Someone was here. In a panic, he rushed to the front door, checking the locks. Everything was in place. The windows were also closed. But then how did the note get into the closet? It flashed through my head, maybe I forgot to put it away earlier? Or is this part of some crazy prank site? He turned on all the lights in the apartment, but it did not add to the feeling of security. When he returned to the bedroom, his phone was vibrating on the bedside table. Message. The number was hidden. "Don't turn around," the text read. My throat tightened and my palms were sweating. His fingers automatically began to type the answer. "Who are you? What do you need?" The answer came instantly. "You know who I am. We're close. Raise your eyes." Daniel didn't listen. Instead, he rushed to the door, jumped out of the bedroom and barricaded himself in the kitchen, slamming the door with a bolt. My heart was pounding, my thoughts were confused. He considered calling the police, but realized that his story about the note and the strange messages was unlikely to be taken seriously. Less than a minute later, the light in the kitchen began to flicker. Then there was a new sound, now not a creak, but a knock. It was clear, measured, as if someone was hitting the glass with his knuckles. Daniel turned slowly to the kitchen window. It opened onto a fire escape. Letters slowly appeared on the glass, behind which nothing could be seen due to the dense layer of dirt, as if someone had written on the glass from the inside. "Open it, or we'll go in ourselves." He staggered back, crashed into the table and, without looking, grabbed the phone. He dialed 911 and pressed the receiver to his ear. The operator answered a few seconds later, but Daniel didn't have time to say a word. The voice on the other end of the line said, "It's getting late, Daniel." He dropped the phone. This couldn't be happening. How did they know? Who are they? In a panic, he grabbed his jacket and keys and rushed to the front door. The lock took an agonizingly long time to open, my fingers trembled, sweat flooded my eyes. When he ran outside, the frosty air whipped him in the face. He ran without taking the road apart. He was afraid to look back, but he felt someone's eyes on him. Finally, he found himself at a 24-hour cafe. Once inside, he sat down in the farthest corner, trying to catch his breath. Daniel called a taxi and went to the only person he could trust, his friend Louis, who once worked in cybersecurity. When Louis opened the door of his apartment, he was shocked by the sight of his friend. "What's the matter with you? It's like you've seen a ghost," he asked. Daniel blurted out everything that had happened. Louis listened for a long time without interrupting, and then took the laptop. "Show me the website. I'll try to figure out what this shit is," he said. When Louis opened the darknet through his secure channel, the True Stories of the Darknet site was no longer available. Instead, a black screen loaded with a single phrase, "Are you watching too, Louis?" Louis quickly closed the browser and turned pale. "We have to leave," he whispered. "Right now." When Louis offered to leave, Daniel felt a surge of anxiety. Leave? But where to? He felt like a hunted animal. Wherever they went, it seemed that those who were following him would find them. Louis pulled him out of his thoughts by grabbing his shoulder. "Get up, Dan. We can't stay here. You don't understand who you're messing with." These words sounded cold and completely knocked him out of his rut. Louis was not a man who panicked easily. If he was afraid, then the situation was much more serious than Daniel could have guessed. A couple of minutes later, they were walking down the stairs, heading for Louis's car. The courtyard was deserted, the lanterns illuminated only certain sections of the road, leaving the corners in darkness. Daniel looked around, feeling goosebumps on his neck. Suddenly, he caught movement in the shadows. "Louis, stop!" he said sharply, stopping. The shadow was moving. A man, if it was a man, was standing nearby, but the darkness hid his face. He didn't move, but Daniel felt that eerie gaze, as if the back of his head had been drilled. "Is that them?" Daniel whispered. Louis didn't bother to figure it out. He grabbed Dan's arm and dragged him to the car. He started the engine and took off. They drove out of the area at speed, weaving through the streets. The car was speeding, leaving the deserted roads behind. "Where are we going?" Daniel asked, feeling panic creep over him. "Take cover," Louis said shortly. After driving through several neighborhoods, Louis turned towards the warehouse area. They parked in front of an abandoned building. "This place," Daniel began, but was interrupted. "You have to trust me," Louis abruptly opened the door and motioned for him to follow him. They went inside. The building seemed abandoned, peeling walls, dusty floors, remnants of old furniture scattered here and there. But there was a bunker in the back of the room that Daniel didn't even know about. "What is this place?" "What is it?" he asked in surprise. "I keep all the equipment for work here. I think I can figure out who's behind this." Louis has already started turning on the computers. "We need to figure this out before they get back in touch." As the hours passed, Louis immersed himself in his work, trying to crack the traces of the site. Daniel was sitting in the corner, nervously gnawing on a nail. His thoughts were confused, and his fear, as if clouded, was replaced by fatigue. But soon the silence was interrupted by a signal. One of Louis's monitors lit up. It was a pop-up picture. It was a picture of Daniel. At first glance, it was an ordinary photograph, but the background left no doubt. This was the bunker in the picture. "Louis, that's..." Daniel began, but froze when he heard footsteps outside the door. They were not alone. Louis rushed to the light switch and turned off the light. They both froze in the dark, hearing only each other's rapid breathing. The footsteps grew louder as they approached their room. "It can't be." I installed motion sensors, they should have warned us, Lewis whispered. They have access, Daniel snapped. Suddenly there was a thud. Someone was banging on the metal door. Lewis grabbed an iron pipe in the corner and motioned for Daniel to take cover behind the equipment. The knocking was replaced by a loud grinding noise. It felt like the door was being opened. Lewis raised the pipe, preparing to strike, but the door suddenly swung open on its own, as if the burglar was in no hurry to enter. Go through the tunnel, Lewis whispered, pointing to the trapdoor in the floor. Daniel hesitated. Leave and leave a friend here? But Lewis didn't give him time to think, yanking open the hatch. Go on. Daniel went downstairs, and then he heard the door close behind him. The tunnel was long and gloomy, its walls were damp, and there was a musty smell. Daniel moved by touch, hearing distant sounds. Something told him that Lewis might not have been able to handle whoever was upstairs. Once outside, he found himself in another part of the city. It was quiet outside, too quiet. He wanted to call the police, but remembered how strangely the operators had behaved earlier. Daniel hailed a taxi and, without thinking, headed to a hotel on the other side of the city. After entering the room, he closed the doors with all the locks, collapsed on the bed and tried to turn off his brain, but it was useless. The pictures of events replayed in my head over and over again. The sound of vibration interrupted the night. His phone rang. The number was hidden again. He picked up the phone without saying a word. You left him to die, a cold voice said. Now it's your turn. Over the noise in the receiver, he heard someone breathing. Who are you? Daniel shouted. But there was no response. Only a high-pitched squeak, which suddenly stopped. When he turned around, he noticed something strange. There was a flash drive on the table in the room that wasn't there before. He hesitated, but then inserted it into the laptop. A signed file appeared on the screen, last warning. The file opened, showing a video recording. Lewis was on it. He was tied to a chair, his face was beaten, and a voiceover ordered him to name names. Daniel felt as if everything inside him had snapped. He closed the laptop, knowing one thing, they would find him. Wherever he is. Daniel closed the laptop, but his hands were shaking so much that the lid slammed shut with a dull crack. A panicky chill gripped my whole body, as if oxygen had been drained from the air. He sat down on the bed, trying to breathe evenly, but each breath was difficult. I left Lewis there, alone with them, and now his thoughts were ragged, like footage from that damn flash drive. Daniel got up and started pacing around the room. My head was spinning with tension, and every sound in the hotel, the noise of the elevator, footsteps in the corridor, echoed with my heart pounding in my chest. It seemed to him that they were already standing outside the door, waiting for him to relax in order to strike. But fear quickly turned to anger. The hell with you, do you want me? Take it away. He shouted into the void, realizing that his nerves were giving out. He needed to act. He couldn't just sit and wait his turn. Lewis was still alive, according to the video. And whoever was behind it all, they had weaknesses. All people are vulnerable. He took out his phone, found the old number of his colleague in the hacker community, Emily, whom he trusted. Emily was the kind of person who wasn't afraid to dig in the dirt for the truth. She answered on the second ring. Dan? Why are you so late? Her voice sounded puzzled. Emily, it's urgent. They took Lewis away. I need your help. Who are they? Are you drunk? No. He almost shouted. I found something on the dark net, and now I'm being hunted. There was a moment of silence, then she sighed heavily. But if you get me into any shit, I'll kill you myself. He knew he was risking her life, but he had no choice. Emily lived in an old house on the outskirts of the city. Her apartment resembled a command post, monitors, routers, wires and mountains of documents. She met Daniel at the door, eyeing him warily. "You look like someone has already killed you," she muttered. "I'm not joking, Em. They took Louis away. They have everything, cameras, network access, they know where I've been, and most likely where I am now." Emily sat him down at the table and nodded at a glass of water. "Tell me from the beginning." Daniel outlined everything: the website, the video, the flash drive, the threats. He was talking fast, jumping from one to the other, but Emily didn't interrupt. Her face was getting darker and darker. "Do you understand what you got yourself into?" she finally said. "It's not just hackers, Dan. These are professionals who have power and money. What am I supposed to do now?" Daniel couldn't hide his despair. "First of all, we'll find out who it is. No one is ever that elusive. In the meantime..." She broke off and tensed, looking at one of the monitors. "What? What did you find?" He leaned closer, but Emily motioned for silence. Her face turned pale. She clicked the mouse a few times, then turned to Daniel. "They're already here." "Where is here?" he whispered. She nodded at the surveillance camera mounted at the entrance door. There were people in black clothes on the screen, their faces were hidden by masks. "Damn it. They can't just..." he began, but Emily interrupted. "We're leaving. Immediately." She grabbed the backpack with the equipment and then pulled it towards the fire escape. There was a thud of the door downstairs, they were already being opened. When they reached the roof, Emily led him to a nearby building. She moved confidently, as if she had planned this route in advance. "Where are we going?" Daniel asked breathlessly. "To one place. But if they catch us," she shot him a serious look, "you're going to tell them everything you know, okay?" "No. I can't have them. You don't understand anything, Dan. These people already know more than you think. They keep you in the game because it's convenient for them." His mind was racing, but there was no time to figure it out. After a few hours of traveling, they found themselves in an old hangar outside the city. Emily connected the equipment and started checking the signals. "They're not just curious hunters," she said, checking the data. "Their system tracks everyone who crosses certain pages. These sites are a trap. They drag you into the game and then..." "Then what?" Daniel interrupted her. She looked at him anxiously. "Then you disappear. Or you work for them." Her words sounded like a sentence. But their conversation was interrupted by a deafening crash. The glass in the hangar windows shattered, and in a few seconds the room was filled with black figures. Emily screamed as she was pinned down and Daniel was pinned against the wall. "We warned you," a deep voice said. The masked man approached, pulling out a knife. Daniel closed his eyes, but there was no impact. Instead, he was roughly lifted to his feet and dragged to the exit. Emily resisted, but was quickly silenced. "Why did you catch us?" Daniel shouted, but the only response was a cold laugh. He was pushed into a van. The lights went out, leaving him in total darkness with the only question in his head: what now? Daniel sat in the dark, feeling the van jolt over the bumps in the road. His hands were tied behind his back, and his skin was rubbing against the hard plastic of the ties. On the other side of the cargo bay, he could hear Emily struggling to free herself, whispering curses. "Emily, how are you?" He whispered so as not to attract attention. Her voice was trembling, but she tried to sound confident. "I have a plan." "A plan?" He laughed a bitter laugh. "We're in a van, tied up, surrounded by these psychos. What's the plan? Just trust me." The van stopped abruptly and their bodies were thrown onto the metal floor. The doors swung open and the beams of lanterns burst in. They were dragged outside, roughly pushed against a concrete building. The place looked like an abandoned factory, with rusty pipes and empty windows. They were separated. Emily was taken into one hallway and Daniel into another. He looked around, trying to catch her eye, but she didn't turn around. He was pushed into a room whose walls were painted sterile white. There was a laptop on the only table. One of the masked men nodded at him. "Sit down." Daniel sat up, feeling paralyzed by fear. Files appeared on the laptop screen. These were photos, videos, even phone records, everything that concerned his life. Every conversation, every online activity, everything he considered personal was now in front of him. "We know everything about you, Daniel," a voice said from the speakers. It was the same cold voice he had heard in the hangar. "We know where you've been, who you love, who's important to you. Why are you doing this?" His voice broke. "I just wanted to understand." "You wanted too much," the voice interrupted. "Now you have a choice." Two videos appeared on the screen. One showed Emily's face, her hands chained to a chair, her eyes wide with fear. On the other, Louis, exhausted and wounded, sat in the dark. "One of them can leave," the voice said. "You decide who." Daniel froze. My head was ringing. He tried to find a way out, some way to save both of them, but nothing came to mind. "Time is running out, Daniel. Decide, or we'll decide for you." His heart was pounding like crazy. He stared at the screen, feeling his life crumble. He began, but the words stuck in his throat. "Decide." The voice became louder, more aggressive. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the two people he had dragged into this hell. Finally he closed his eyes and whispered, "Emily." The screen went blank. Daniel collapsed onto the table, his body shaking with sobs. He didn't know if they heard his answer, but a moment later the door swung open. They didn't give him time to realize what was happening. They lifted him up and dragged him through the corridors again. When they got outside, he saw the van driving away, taking Emily away. "Is she alive?" he shouted, but there was no answer.